The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and Victoria Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the city blur beneath sheets of water. At 34, she was the youngest female CEO in her industry, a woman whose name appeared on Forbes lists and whose decisions moved markets. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she was just a woman who'd promised her dying grandmother one thing, that she'd try, one last time, to let someone in. Her phone buzzed. The car was waiting downstairs. Victoria pressed her forehead against the cool glass, closing her eyes. 6 months ago, she'd sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed, holding a hand that had once seemed so strong but had become paper-thin. "Promise me," her grandmother had whispered, her voice barely audible above the beeping machines. "Promise me you'll stop hiding behind your success. Promise me you'll go on one more date. Just one, for me." Victoria had promised. She always kept her promises. Now, sliding into the back seat of her car, she wondered if this was the universe's idea of a cruel joke. Another blind date, another awkward dinner with a man her well-meaning friends insisted was perfect for her. She'd been through 12 of these in the past 4 months. 12 men who either wanted to merge their company with hers, who were intimidated by her success, or who spent the entire evening talking about themselves while checking their phones. This would be the last one. She'd promised her grandmother one more try, and this was it. The restaurant was smaller than she'd expected, tucked away in a neighborhood she rarely visited. Not the usual upscale establishments where she conducted business dinners. This place had checkered tablecloths and a handwritten menu board. Her friend Sarah had chosen it, insisting that sometimes magic happens in the most unexpected places. Victoria stepped inside, shaking rain from her coat. The hostess smiled warmly and gestured toward a table in the corner, where a man sat with his back to her, his shoulders slightly hunched as he studied the menu. As she approached, he stood and turned around. The world stopped. It was him. After 16 years, it was still him. "Victoria?" Daniel Matthews stood frozen, his eyes wide with the same shock she felt coursing through her veins. I don't understand. Sarah said—" "Sarah set this up," Victoria finished, her voice barely steady. She sank into the chair across from him, without waiting for an invitation. Her legs suddenly unable to support her. Of course she did. Daniel sat down slowly, running his hand through hair that was shorter now, touched with grey at the temples. He'd aged, but in a way that made him more handsome, not less. The boyish features she'd loved at 18 had matured into something solid, dependable. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, marks of laughter and worry both. "You look—" he started. "Different," she supplied. She knew she did. The girl he'd known had been all wild dreams and reckless hope, believing she could change the world through sheer determination. That girl had worn thrift store dresses and had more passion than sense. "I was going to say beautiful," Daniel said softly. "You always were. But yes, different too, successful. I've read about you. Everyone has." The weight of 16 years sat between them like a third presence at the table. Victoria remembered the last time she'd seen him, standing on the platform at Union Station. She'd been leaving for a scholarship at Harvard, and he'd been staying behind to care for his sick mother. They'd been so young, so in love, so certain that they could make long-distance work. They'd been wrong. "So," Victoria said, reaching for the composure that usually came so easily in boardrooms and negotiations. "Sarah tells me you have a daughter?" Daniel's face transformed. The guardedness fell away, replaced by pure, unfiltered love. "Emma, she's 7, He pulled out his phone, and Victoria found herself looking at a photo of a little girl with Daniel's eyes and a gap-toothed grin. "She's everything." "Her mother?" Victoria asked, hating how much she needed to know, how much it still hurt after all these years. "Gone," Daniel said, and the single word carried mountains of grief. "Cancer, 3 years ago. Emma was only 4. Victoria felt her chest constrict. "Daniel, I'm so sorry." "Me too." He put the phone away, and she saw him physically gather himself, squaring his shoulders. "But we're doing okay. Better than okay, actually." Emma's an amazing kid, resilient, funny, smarter than I ever was." He paused. "She's the reason I'm here, actually. I haven't dated since Jessica died. But my brother convinced me that Emma needs to see that it's okay to be happy again. That love doesn't end just because loss happens." The waiter appeared, and they ordered without really looking at the menu. When he left, the silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who'd once known each other's thoughts before they were spoken, trying to remember the language they'd shared. "I saw your mother's obituary," Victoria said quietly. 2 years after I left. I wanted to come to the funeral, but I thought that it would be too hard." Daniel finished. "Yeah, probably would have been. I was a mess back then. But she asked about you, you know, right near the end. Wanted to know if you were happy. What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I didn't know." He met her eyes. "Are you happy?" It was such a simple question. Victoria had given keynote speeches about success, had been interviewed about what it takes to make it in a male-dominated industry, had mentored countless young women on achieving their dreams. But this simple question from the man she'd loved more than ambition, more than success, more than anything, stripped away all her practiced answers. "I'm successful," she said finally. "I'm respected. I've built something that matters. But happy." She looked down at her hands. Manicured and professional, so different from the paint-stained fingers she'd had at 18 when she used to dream of being an artist, before practicality intervened. I don't think I've asked myself that question in a very long time. Daniel reached across the table, then stopped himself halfway, his hand hovering in the space between them. "Can I tell you something? When my brother set up this blind date, when he showed me your profile without the name, I saw successful CEO, driven, intelligent, and I almost said no, because those words scared me. They made me think of someone who wouldn't have time for a single dad with a modest job as a high school teacher, someone who wouldn't want to deal with soccer practice and parent-teacher conferences, and a kid who still sometimes has nightmares about losing her mom." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "And now? Now I see you. Not the CEO, not the success story, just Victoria. The girl who used to talk about using business to make the world better. The girl who cried at sad movies and laughed so hard at bad jokes that she'd snort. The girl who believed that kindness mattered more than winning." He finally let his hand drop back to his side. "And I wonder if she's still in there somewhere." "She is," Victoria whispered. "She's just been buried under a lot of armor." They talked through dinner. The conversation flowed like a river finding its old course, sometimes rushing, sometimes slow, but always moving forward. Daniel told her about Emma's obsession with dinosaurs, about his job teaching history to teenagers who thought the world began with social media, about the small house he'd bought in a neighborhood with good schools and friendly neighbors. Victoria found herself sharing things she never told anyone, about the loneliness of success, the constant pressure to prove herself, the way she'd sacrificed relationships and friendships on the altar of achievement, about her grandmother, who'd been the one person who always saw through the titles and the accomplishments to the woman beneath. "She sounds like she was wonderful," Daniel said when Victoria finished telling a story about her grandmother, sneaking her out of boarding school for ice cream. "She was. She made me promise at the end that I'd stop hiding, that I'd be brave enough to be vulnerable again." Victoria smiled sadly. "I think she'd be amused that the universe sent you to me for my last blind date." "Last?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Giving up on love? Maybe, or maybe just accepting that some people aren't meant for that kind of happiness, that maybe my purpose is different." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made Victoria's breath catch. "Jessica told me something before she died. She said that she was grateful she'd gotten to love me and Emma, but that she was sad she wouldn't get to see who I became next. She made me promise not to stop becoming, not to freeze myself in grief and duty. She said that loving someone doesn't mean stopping when they're gone. It means carrying what they taught you forward." She sounds like she was an incredible woman. She was. And you know what she would have said about tonight? About me sitting here with my first love, both of us carrying our scars and our losses, he smiled. She would have said that the universe doesn't do coincidences. That when two people find their way back to each other, it's because there's still something unfinished between them. Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Daniel, I don't know how to be anything other than what I am now. I work 70-hour weeks. I have a company that depends on me. People who rely on my decisions. I can't just... I'm not asking you to give up anything, Daniel interrupted gently. I'm just asking if maybe, possibly, there might be room in that successful, busy, important life of yours for a high-school teacher and his dinosaur-obsessed daughter. Not to fix you or complete you or any of that romantic movie nonsense. Just to be with you. To remind you that success and happiness aren't mutually exclusive. Victoria looked at this man who'd once been her whole world, who she'd left behind in pursuit of dreams that had come true, but left her hollow. She thought about her grandmother's words. She thought about the girl she used to be, who believed that the measure of a life wasn't what you achieved but who you loved, and how you made them feel. I'm terrified, she admitted. Me too, Daniel said. Emma's terrified too, though she doesn't know about you yet. She's scared I'm going to find someone who doesn't want a ready-made family, who doesn't have time for bedtime stories and school plays. Tell me about her, Victoria said. Tell me everything. And he did. Daniel pulled out his phone again and showed her videos of Emma at her soccer game, fierce and determined. Photos of Emma covered in flour from a baking disaster. A drawing Emma had made of their family, her, Daniel, and her mother as an angel in the sky. Victoria felt her heart expand with each image. This little girl who'd experienced such loss, but still smiled so brightly. This child who needed to know that the world held more joy than sorrow. Could I meet her? Victoria asked. I mean, not as a date or anything. Just as, I don't know. Your friend? Daniel's smile was like sunrise. She'd love that. She's obsessed with successful women right now. Last week she announced she's going to be either a paleontologist or the president, possibly both. Victoria laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. She sounds perfect. They left the restaurant hours later, after the staff had started giving them gentle hints by wiping down nearby tables. The rain had stopped, and the city sparkled with that clean, washed look that comes after a storm. Standing on the sidewalk, Victoria turned to Daniel. This wasn't what I expected tonight. What did you expect? Another disappointment. Another reminder that I'm too much or not enough, depending on who's doing the judging. Another data point proving that maybe I'm just not meant for this. And now? Victoria thought about her grandmother, who'd somehow known exactly what she needed, who'd made her promise to try one more time, who'd probably known, in that mysterious way grandmothers do, that the last person you expect is often the right person. Now I think maybe I've been measuring success by the wrong metrics, Victoria said. Maybe the bravest thing I can do isn't to close another deal or break another glass ceiling. Maybe it's to open my heart to the possibility that I can have both, that I don't have to choose between being successful and being loved. Daniel stepped closer and Victoria could smell his cologne, familiar even after all these years. For what it's worth, I think you're incredibly brave. Building what you've built, becoming who you've become. But I also think the girl I fell in love with 16 years ago is still in there. The one who believed that the point of success was to lift others up, to make the world kinder. I want to meet Emma, Victoria said decisively. And I want to take this slow. Because I have no idea how to date as a CEO and I'm terrified of disappointing her. But I want to try. My grandmother was right. Some promises are worth keeping even when they scare you. Daniel pulled out his phone. Emma's at my brother's place. What are you doing right now? Victoria thought about the reports waiting on her desk, the early morning meeting she had scheduled, the 100 things that usually filled her evenings. Then she thought about a 7-year-old girl who loved dinosaurs and needed to see that her father deserved happiness. I'm free, she said, and meant it in more ways than one. 20 minutes later, Victoria stood in front of a modest house in a tree-lined neighborhood. Her hands were shaking. Daniel squeezed her fingers gently. "She's going to love you," he said. The door opened, and a small whirlwind with Daniel's eyes and wild, curly hair launched herself at him. "Daddy! Uncle Mike let me stay up late because I told him it was for science." "Emma, this is my friend Victoria," Daniel said, crouching down to his daughter's level. Emma studied Victoria with the serious intensity only a 7-year-old could muster. "Are you the lady who runs a whole company?" Victoria knelt down too, not caring about her expensive dress on the wet ground. "I am. But right now, I'm just someone who'd really like to hear about dinosaurs, if you have time to tell me." Emma's face lit up like fireworks. "Do you know about Pachycephalosaurus? They're the best because they had really thick skulls and they could headbutt stuff." Victoria looked up at Daniel, who was watching them with an expression of such hope and tenderness that it made her chest ache. She looked back at Emma, this beautiful, resilient child who'd already learned that love and loss coexisted, that joy could survive sorrow. "I don't know much about Pachycephalosaurus," Victoria admitted, "but I'd love to learn." And as Emma grabbed her hand, pulling her into the house while chattering about Mesozoic eras and fossil formations, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in 16 years. She felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not in a boardroom or a corner office, but here, in this moment, with the man who'd once been her whole world, and the little girl who might just help her rebuild it. Her grandmother had been right. Sometimes you have to go backward to move forward. Sometimes the last blind date isn't an ending at all. Sometimes it's a beginning.